Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. Today we're going to return to the world of walk-ins. Check out my previous episode on walk-ins. It was a very popular episode and I got lots of messages and emails on it. A lot of people suspecting that they might be walk-ins or they might know of a walk-in in their life. So I wanted to return to this and get some more information about what I could find so that I could help you. I can't possibly answer all the emails, and I know what you're going through because I have the same questions myself. Walk-ins, if you did not watch that episode, is the concept that some people reach a point in their life where they give up and they switch souls with another soul who takes over their life with permission. And this higher density soul comes in, and 100% of the time they are here to improve the planet, to change the planet, to help people out. And there's a lot of different examples given in that first episode, such as Abraham Lincoln. And so the question is, are you a walk-in? Am I a walk-in? And that episode kind of tries to discuss some of the research that I had found on the concept of walk-ins. Many people will claim that they had this sudden immense change in their lives, and the walk-in still holds the same memories, and you could become a walk-in and not know it. Or this could all just be ridiculous and none of it true. I was basing some of this on the research of Ruth Montgomery, who had written some fantastic books back in the 80s. She had some guides that gave her information about this. I've also discussed some different literature that you can find. There's a book called Walk-ins Among Us that is very good. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this. Ruth Montgomery, in her book, Strangers Among Us, has a chapter on how to recognize walk-ins, and I wanted to talk about that. And in her research, she found that walk-ins had advice and knowledge to impart, and some of the knowledge is pretty interesting, such as channeling energies and the flow. So I wanted to share that as well. So in her chapter on recognizing the walk-ins, it begins by saying, the guides resumed the morning discussions as if there had been no break in their dictation. Why not commence now, they wrote, to understand for the readers how they may sense a walk-in, for there are ways to know him in a crowd, and by protecting him to further his cause. They are ones who have undergone a major adjustment in living and attitude. They are sensitive to the wishes of others and ready to help in a quiet manner without effusiveness or desire to attract attention to their helpfulness. Just the opposite of someone who loudly proclaims their service to others. During my absence abroad, Ruth Montgomery says, I had again become assailed with doubts about the reality of walk-ins. But the guide sensed this and moved to reassure me, declaring, walk-ins are as real as the girl next door, and we are affirming that they entered those bodies as adults. They are all around you and will soon become more apparent as the world recognizes the need for rapidly stepping up that process in preparation for the evil days of the next decades and the shift of the axis at the close of the century. Now, side note, there was no shift of the axis, and perhaps this was stopped at some point. But they go on to say there will be declaring themselves publicly before too long as an essential step in recognizing the work that will have to be done rapidly and well. This seemed rather confusing. The guides had emphasized the dire necessity of protecting the identity of walk-ins, while also stating that they will soon be declaring themselves. I therefore asked for clarification at the next day's session, and in their imperturbable manner, they wrote, the importance of protecting them at the present time is paramount, for there are not yet enough of them in physical body to protect each other from the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. But they will soon be coming in such large numbers that there will be sufficient understanding of their role to accept them as the sacrificial souls that they are, working always for the good of others. Until then, if one senses that a friend or acquaintance is a walk-in, he will be wise to keep it to himself or to speak quietly of his belief to that person without spreading it around. We have lessons to learn then in flesh, and one of them is to protect the privacy of others. I asked how we might recognize walk-ins, and the guides replied, there are obvious ways: a distinct alteration of personality and thought patterns, a traumatic experience or severe illness that has altered a person for the better, a willingness to help with others' burdens and quietly to counsel them without expecting personal reward, an inner poise, a quiet radiance, an unwillingness to exchange harmful gossip about others, a certain reticence about his own hurdles and challenges. Walk-ins are seldom gabby. Their sight is on a rising star, and they do not stoop to maligning others. Take a special look at a member of a city council who speaks wisely when called upon, but seeks no credit for himself. One who is willing for others to take credit for the idea that he has put into their minds. A calm demeanor, a soul who genuinely likes his fellow beings, without establishing too close ties with any of them. Tantalized by the last sentence, I asked if walk-ins form emotional alliances, and the guides responded, a walk-in may fall in love, but only if there are no entangling alliances to be disturbed. They are human while in flesh after all, but they often seem to be operating at two levels. One in everyday affairs about which they go cheerfully, and the other on a higher plane, as if their thoughts are elsewhere. This does not mean a vagueness, but rather a double operational level, recognizing the needs of workaday life, but citing goals that seem to be beyond those of their compatriots. Their eyes are tranquil, they are steady. If one could read their auras, as some psychics can, they would note a decided alteration from the body's aura under its previous occupant. They radiate peace, confidence, and human warmth. They are helpful and kind. Sometimes pairs of souls decide to return together. Having formed a strong attachment through many lifetimes, they feel that they will more quickly sense their altered state as walk-ins by finding each other, and they will thus await an opportunity where perhaps a couple or two friends or two siblings have wearied of life and wish to return to spirit. It is always easier to have a friend in the long earth pole, someone who cares and is willing to share one's load. This latter comment interested me, since Laura and Miriam have apparently tapped into several previous lives, covering a wide range of geographical areas and time sequences when they were friends or relatives. Laura is a great deal younger than Miriam and much newer to her present walk-in role, which has given to her in a different country, so they obviously did not become walk-ins together. Yet Miriam was able to locate and make known to Laura her altered status. She has also helped to understand the nature of the walk-in phenomenon. For each new walk-in is generally contacted by a genuine friend who will help with his adjustment. Another of my new friends is aware that he took over the body of a soldier who was dying on the battlefield. Since the guides have stressed that walk-ins may enter only with the consent of a walk-out, I asked how an unconscious dying person could make such an agreement. I was told that when a dying man or woman is unable to support his life energies, which are slipping away from the physical body, the brotherhoods who work in this field are sometimes able to reanimate it for use by a more energized entity who wishes to enter that badly injured form. When a baby is born, his umbilical cord must be cut, the guides explained. Likewise, when the physical body dies, the so-called silver cord is severed, because the silver cord belongs to the departing soul, or walk out. It must be snapped before a walk-in enters. That is the reason for the moment or two of unconsciousness that we mentioned earlier. If a body is actually dying, as far as the occupant is concerned, the particular brotherhoods that are composed of metasurgeons are often able to reanimate that life form for a walk-in. Musing about the superior qualities that the guides have assigned to walk-ins, and acutely aware of how badly we need heroes in this age of grafting public officials and self-serving leaders, I asked if it would not be better to make their identities known now. No, my unseen friends emphatically replied. We all have a responsibility to protect walk-ins. Do not tell others if one suspects that a friend or acquaintance is a substitution for the original ego in that body. Wait until that person is ready to reveal himself, for the time will not be far off when they will be accepted as valuable contributors to the community and honored as such. Their present need is for privacy to prevent witch hunts or crude remarks while they go about their important tasks they choose of their own free will. Filled with admiration for these high-minded personages, I asked if a walk-in ever decides to become a walk-out because of his own discouragement or severe illness. Never, the guides promptly responded. One is under universal discipline when he returns through a special privilege as a walk-in. Having taken the pledge of selflessness, there is now no way that he is permitted to withdraw short of physical death itself. Another question was plaguing me, inasmuch as walk-ins are said to have such important missions that they are permitted to forego the time-wasting process of birth and childhood. I wanted to know whether they regard it as a waste of time to have to complete the projects of those they replace before getting on with their own tasks. The guides replied in the negative, explaining, no, they do not regard finishing those tasks as time wasting. It is as much a part of their bargain as it is for the rest of you to secure the right to return to human body as babies. We told you of what we term heavenly computers, which match physical opportunities with the candidates for re-entry as babies. It is the same with walk-ins, except the candidacy there is far more limited, being restricted to those with specific missions to aid mankind, who have schooled for it in what walk-ins terms the otherwhere. A walk-in is required to tie up the loose ends of his predecessor in order to be free for the tasks he came in to do, otherwise he cannot enter that body. Because the guides had earlier identified Mohandas Gandhi as a walk-in who has not reincarnated, I wondered why, in a view of the overwhelming problems in India today, he has not again returned there to an adult body. With remarkable patience for a dull scholar, my unseen tutors replied, Gandhi succeeded admirably in the task he came in to perform, to demonstrate that a nation can achieve freedom without warfare. He is now working from this side and reaching far more humans than if he returned to another body, which would not be recognized by others as the habitation for the soul of Gandhi. There is work to be done on this side, so vast in its reaches and so complicated that those with special skills as senders and receivers are urgently needed to prepare earthlings for the shift, while also preparing the spirit dimension for the return of souls in large numbers at the end of this century. Gandhi is serving well. Here again was an unpleasant reminder of the enormous loss of life as we think of it, that the guides foresee when the earth shifts on its axis. To them, of course, it is not loss of life, but graduation from schoolhouse earth to a higher dimension of living. And they say of this change, to prepare for it, so love your neighbor that you feel yourself becoming one with all humanity. This will ease the crossover, as there will seem to be one happy family of souls delighted to be together while embarking on a new adventure. No one need be lonely or dissatisfied when he has a friend in another human being, so take the time to make friends. Of all those whom you come in daily contact, the grocer, the taxi driver, the housewife, the old lady down the street, the child on the corner, all have a place in your own life and will enrich your life. Take time for other people. Feel warmth and love extending to them, and it will return to you in like measure. Give of self and reap the automatic rewards. I had recently been rereading Winged Pharaoh by Joan Grant, with its account of the ancient Egyptian initiation in which one prepared for the priesthood by being entombed alone in a pyramid while leaving the physical body for rather horrifying experiences. Many who entered the initiation experience did not survive it. But those who did emerged far greater vision and insight. Could this initiation, I wondered, have been a preparation for walk-ins who could then carry out the duties of the newly initiated priest or priestess? On putting this question to the guides, they gave this revealing reply. The initiation was not so much a project for walk-ins as it was the purification of spirit by those who entered the underground tombs to commune with their inner selves. They were intent on improving self so that they would be able to aid others as priests. This was a time of great mental torture in the sense that we are all members of the human race and accustomed to being totally alone for long periods with nothing to think of except the inner self. It is a harrowing experience as we begin to see aspects of ourselves never before noted and from which we would escape, as children would from a bogeyman. There will always be some who find horrors within, and all of us have plenty to delve into that is unpleasant. But the times when we really look within are as eventful and rare as a trip to the moon. The initiation provided that opportunity, and those who survived were the better for it, purified and stripped of entangling karma. Thus, if some were there to see only the good, they would find more of it than those who wish to see evil in others, for they are buoyant people with a richness of love. There are some who, in relating their dreams, view them as nightmares, while others look beyond the outer appearance to the inner quality exposed to view. Analyzing our dreams is in some respect like that Egyptian initiation, in that we pull out of our subconscious intimate aspects of ourselves for analysis. Some of those who went into the Egyptian initiation chose to withdraw in favor of a substitute or walk-in, but that was not the prime purpose of the rite. Nearly all great religious leaders of past ages emphasized the importance of finding inner calm and peace within one's own being. Many of them were reportedly born of virgins and were eventually crucified. All of them understood the teaching that there were no miracles, only life energies, and that what seemed miraculous was simply an understanding and operation of cosmic law. My walk-in friends say that not one of those leaders called himself a Messiah or Savior, or came to found a new religion. Jesus Christ claimed no miracles and told his followers that what he did, they would do also, and even greater things. It was the followers who founded religions based on the teachings of those matters. I therefore submitted to the guides a partial list of religious leaders, which included Krishna, Gautama Siddhartha, the Buddha, Horus, Odin, Zoroaster, Mithra, Thoth, Indra, Tat, Alcides, Baduru, Quetzalcoatl, Cadmus, Adonis, and Quirinus, asking if they were walk-ins. My guides replied that most of the ones in the list were avatars rather than walk-ins, and that they would explain the difference. An avatar, they began, is a superior or perfected soul who returns for a time and then withdraws to the spirit realm, coming and going into physical being at will, but not always wearing the physical body itself. By contrast, those who wish to become walk-ins have to stay until that life is terminated through normal means, with the body dying. Some of the great spiritual leaders were walk-ins and others were avatars. The avatars were able to show themselves to others at a distance in physical life form, although they may also be seen at the same moment hundreds of miles away. Jesus was seen by his followers and others in human form after his crucifixion, you will recall. Quetzalcoatl was a walk-in, yes, and he was an Atlantean when they were many of them in that island kingdom, and he visited Mexico to reform its agriculture and aid the masses. Krishna and some of the others were avatars at the time that history records them, but had been walk-ins in previous sojourns in flesh. As to Moses, the Old Testament patriarch, he was a walk-in from a previous life as an Egyptian hierophant, coming into the adult body of the young Moses, who felt the need to end the captivity of his race. What of my new friend's assertion that walk-ins return not as saviors, but as servants and never take adult bodies in order to found a new religion? If this is true, how could they explain Christ's assertion Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. When I put this puzzler to Lily, Art, and the group, they responded, yes, the business of not saviors but servants needs a little explanation. All walk-ins who return to adult bodies are trying to save man from his baser self. Thus they could be termed saviors to that extent, although they are not trying to start a new religion, but to alter man himself. Through example and gentle hints, Jesus the man was a practicing Jew who had no intention of founding a new church. But when the Christ spirit entered, he saw the desperate need for a widening of the narrow Jewish laws and felt that Peter would be the one to broaden the base of that movement so that Gentiles and all who believed in God might seek the same perfection. Loving others is said to be the key to spiritual growth, and it was Christ who gave the new commandment, love one another. Now, I totally suggest that you read the book Threshold to Tomorrow if you want further information. Ruth Montgomery interviews several walk-ins, and several of them are very enlightening. We can certainly go into further detail, but they talk about the personal stories of those walk-ins and what they had gone through. Now, this book and several others have identified some key components of how to tell if you're a walk-in or if someone is a walk-in. We discussed these in the last episode, but to remind you, there's an abrupt change in personality that may result from a dissociative event, a near-death experience, a suicide attempt, or a perilous marker. There's a feeling that the body has been short-circuited or that nerves have been fried. And there's a feeling that the person is a stranger in their own body. This could be talking about you or someone else. A brain fog or sudden loss of memory, having a sense that they're a misfit on earth. This feeling may have intensified when two souls swap places. And suddenly having a chronic fatigue and muscle pain, such as fibromyalgia, is also reported in the actual event of walk-ins. And spiritual gifts suddenly opening up is obviously common. You start to know things about people that no one has told you. You suddenly start to see, hear, or feel non-physical beings around you. And that's what these walk-ins can do. They're more telepathic. They have a higher sensitivity. It would be easy to say that anybody that's gone through a transformation is a walk-in, but obviously that's not the case. When I have asked my higher self, which I finally did after that episode, I asked, am I a walk-in? I was told I was not. So it's certainly, my story is very similar in what happened, but I don't think I'm a walk-in. I may be just a starseed, which would be somebody that reincarnated, but not a walk-in. I don't know. Everybody's going to be a little bit different, but we all have our own journeys. But so when Ruth Montgomery went and interviewed these walk-ins, there's some interesting information that came up, some that we can apply to the reality revolution. They talk about the flow and channeling of energies. For instance, Ruth Montgomery goes on to say, from time to time, my new friends, the walk-ins, and my unseen friends, the guides, have made references to the flow. The term was new to me, and because they seemed to consider it of paramount importance, I was eager to learn more about it. The flow, they say, is all around us, in a constantly evolving upward spiral. But the trick is in learning how to let oneself flow with those energies in their currents. The guides, declaring that all of us are constantly bathed in a sea of energies, initiated their discussion of the flow in this way. The entire cosmos is energy. It's not just composed of energy, it is energy. And since we are infinitesimal parts of the cosmos, we too are energy. Therefore, when you say that you are tired, you are simply saying that you are out of tune with the universal energy, the cosmic flow. The flow. Get into it and swim. Submerge yourself in it. Feel yourself as a pulsating, living part of the universe. To swim into the flow, lie on the floor or on the bed and feel as if you are being swept off head first, still in a prone position and floating into a sea of energy. It's not difficult for one who uses a tenth of his native imagination. Go with the tide. Don't bucket. Energize yourself and you'll begin to awaken that awareness that is too often bred out of human beings from birth onward with the regimen of feeding, schooling, and mind control imposed by well-meaning parents and teachers. That's why mistakes keep being repeated over and over, and why man's upward progress seems so inert. Those fine people who correct utterances of children slow their imagination and teach them the same fallacies, which they themselves have been spoon-fed throughout their lives. Any baby would know that life is indestructible and that the soul is in a continuing process of birth into body and birth into spirit, ad infinitum. It's the adults who tell him otherwise. Since walk-ins, by skipping childhood, are able to avoid this conditioning, they bring in an awareness intact and are thus more easily able to keep themselves within the flow. The flow sounds very much like the vortex that Abraham Hicks talks about. Ruth Montgomery goes on to say, I like the way Michael states it. Awareness often whispers through one's consciousness as intuition or hunches. Once one mentally lifts himself into the dimension of awareness and lets his inner life essence remain within the flow, his awareness is tuned in, and he can function far more effectively in his daily life and activities. I asked him to explain the differences between awareness and flow, and he replied, flow is of all living energies. Awareness is of all mind, the universal mind. One of the primary purposes of walk-ins is to bring in awareness of greater dimensions and greater freedom, and awareness is in part a sensitivity to the flow. Many walk-ins are not consciously aware of what they are, yet the awareness of flow is in them, and they intuitively know how to remain in the flow while attributing their choices to hunches. Intuition is from awareness, percolating down through human consciousness. Intuition is a knowing without having to reason it. Because my friend Laura has so recently become a walk-in, I queried her about how she learned to get into the flow. I began to pay more careful attention to my intuition, she replied. I began each day to see what my overall goals were in this lifetime, and what the overall goal of humanity might be, and I started listening very carefully within. It's a matter of quietly choosing, continuously, the direction that seems to be the most harmonious with one's inner being. Intuition is one of the facets of awareness. He who gets up in the morning determined to clear his desk and get a lot of things done without regard for what may feel right is bucking the tide and placing himself out of the flow. But he who acts from an inner sense of what will work today has placed himself in the flow. When I wrote to you in June, Laura continued, I was in the flow, for some inner sense told me that this was the time to dangle the idea of walk-ins in front of you. I had thought about it earlier, but it never seemed like the right time to contact you. But when the timing felt right, the letter wrote itself. It was done in the flow, for it reached you at a time when you were most receptive to it. On another day, you might have answered it politely and then discarded the letter. Thus, it is with the flow. He who trusts his intuition and places himself in the flow will seem to ride on a current of energy, and along the way several other factors will fall in line as if intended. The guides describe the flow as an upward spiral that encircles the entire cosmos, touching on all things and all beings. But the flow, as it affects earthlings, is such a gradual encirclement of the planet that the spiraling is barely perceptible. This flow is available to all, whether aware of it or not, they explained. It is evolving, growing, altering, and yet never changing in its patterns. All things are reflected in it, all thoughts and moods and humors. The knowledge is there, and it was this flow that Bill Gray called the ring when he would tell you that he was taking my answers off the ring. Continuing their discussion, the guides wrote, one's intuitive forces determine one's own flow within the flow. If you sense that it is right for you to take a certain action, you are moving in the flow, and that movement is ever upward. If you're bucking it, you are disturbed, distressed, restless, and unhappy. To move with the flow is to be in the natural groove. Stay with it, and all is smooth sailing for your projects, your friendships, and decisions. Step out of it, and you are floundering. Intuition is the test, for if you know within yourself that something is right, that the time is right, you are rising with the spiraling flow. And as the Irish say, you will have the wind at your back. But if you try to pretend to yourself that what you are doing will pass muster, and you go against your conscience, if you try to move when the time does not feel right, then you are stepping out of the flow, and nothing seems to go right for long. Shamelessly fishing for a compliment, I asked the guides, "Am I in the flow when I'm writing this book?" I was hoping, of course, for a resounding yes. But that is not the way my unseen friends respond to my fishing expeditions. "When you feel that a chapter is right, then you are in the flow," they responded gravely. "When something bothers you about it, then what you feel about it is out of your depth. Put it aside for a time until it suddenly seems to flow into the rest of the material. Don't force anything. Don't accept all without feeling within yourself that it adds to the value. Don't push yourself or your faithful readers out of their depth by taking new ideas whose time for you has not yet come. Stay in the flow, my dear. You are aware when it's right for you and through you for your readers." It was with a sigh of relief after reading this that I abandoned a highly technical segment of this chapter having to do with kinetic energies versus life energies in their relation to the flow. The information had come from my friend Michael, and because I know him to be brilliant and high-minded, I had been struggling for many days with the material, trying to put it into words that I felt would have meaning for my readers and myself, but feeling that it had no real significance in helping to understand the flow. How marvelous to discover that I had been bucking the flow, and that if I cast the material aside, I could return to inner harmony. Perhaps I will be ready for such abstruse subjects in my next incarnation. Laura, who seems more down to earth than Michael, offered several practical analogies of how one can learn to sense the flow. "Anyone who has put his canoe into white water in the spring," she says, "knows that the best way to get downstream is to be alert, keep one's direction steady, and ride the smooth water as it rushes around or over rocks. If you simply plunge forward willy-nilly or try to force against the current, you risk nosing under, turning broadside, sinking your canoe, or getting badly injured," she declared. "Likewise, if you place yourself in the flow, you can ride the currents of energy and reach your goal more quickly, safely, and easily than if you tried to make something happen. But you must learn to sense the flow. Boys in a whitewater canoe learn to sense water currents, having taken their share of spills when they guessed incorrectly. Likewise, glider pilots learn through trial and error to ride the air currents correctly, sensing the likely updrafts. The pilots of hot air balloons learn to read the signs given by cloud shapes and sense which altitudes have currents that will take them in the better direction they want to go. Jet pilots make better time when they fly with tailwinds or choose altitudes where turbulence is lower. If you would be in the flow, riding its currents of energy, you must learn to sense the direction of flow for any given project on any given day." I asked how this could be accomplished, and she replied, "First, look toward your immediate goal and know that you will reach it. When it is time to choose between one direction or another, simply pause for a moment, blank your mind, and listen to your intuition. Don't try to reason with logic. Your own inner sense will tell you which choice to make. If it is any more meaningful, ask for guidance from whatever source is most comfortable for you, whether divine inspiration, prayer, or help from discarnates. Try being in the flow as often as you think of it. As you test for yourself, you will find that it works. Decisions come more easily, and goals are more readily reached. When you place yourself in the direction that feels the most harmonious, then you will be carried along to the accomplishment of each succeeding goal with greater sense. Being in the flow can help you to escape from danger. Newspapers often carry stories about people who, at the last minute, decided not to take a particular plane or train that subsequently crashed. "Something told me not to take it," they are quoted as saying, "even though I held a ticket on it." They were in the flow, whether or not they realized it, and listened to their intuition. Laura says, "Of these phenomena, I remember reading of studies done on train accidents, where on the day of a serious mishap, fewer passengers than usual were on the problem train. I recall the plane that crashed across a busy highway at rush hour in New York, and as if by a miracle, there happened to be no cars on the highway at the point of impact. If you remain in the flow and trust your inner guidance, you will find that in accident or disaster, your intuition will guide you to reach safety and to help others to safety. For one who remains in the flow, disasters are merely learning experiences, challenges to work through, stepping stones along an upward path. A strongly visualized goal becomes a spiritual magnet to which the necessary tools are drawn if one remains in the flow. To illustrate, one of my walk-in friends who does not have much money seems instinctively to know when to leave his house in order to hitch a safe and comfortable ride to his destination. He has had no scary encounters, and he has never had to wait for more than a few minutes for a car to pick him up. More than once, when driving to work, Laura has suddenly left home a half hour early or varied her normal route for no apparent reason other than that inner prompting told her to do so. Later, she has learned of a disastrous pileup of cars at the place on the highway where she would otherwise have been at that exact time. Just as animals living in the wild state sense danger and flee, so most of us are born with this intuitive sense, but it is often disciplined out of us in our youth. The walk-ins enter without the childhood conditioning, and despite the memory patterns inherited from the previous owner of his body, he soon begins to see that the old way of thinking does not work nearly as well as what he perceives as a new outlook. He may not yet know that he is a walk-in, but having brought in awareness, he will instinctively trust his intuition every day. He will set goals, and by his intuitive trust or inner knowing, will accomplish his purpose because opportunities will open and the right situations or tools will seem to fall into his path at the right moment. Others, marveling at success in an endeavor that they had considered impossible, will say that he had lucky breaks, when what he actually did was to place himself in the flow and move along with the current. Enchanted by the seemingly magical powers of the flow, I asked the guides if there was a technique that I could use in putting the business problems of a certain friend into the flow, so that they could more easily be solved for him. The answer is no, they replied. Each will have to do that for himself, but the flow is there for anyone to meld into if he so desires. There's no way for another to put you into the flow. We are here to help point the way, but each person must himself flow into it. Not everyone is interested in becoming a part of the flow. It is sometimes entailed going against one's financial aspirations. For one is hell-bent on getting money, he will perhaps be stepping on others' toes, or even going against his own conscience. The flow works for unselfish purposes, but is not a cure-all for getting or making money. Let that be made clear. This is not one of those do-it-yourself articles on how to make $1 million or swing a big deal or break the bank at Monte Carlo. The flow is an evolutionary spiral for the uplifting of the entire human race and all that it touches. Therefore, the way to find inner peace, tranquility, accomplishment, and love is to put oneself into the flow through harmonious thoughts and helpfulness to others. It will move one toward his goals if they are worthy. It will also protect those who utilize it from danger, for the sensing of the flow guides one to safe areas and to safe time sequences. I asked the guides if they could be more specific about how to get into the flow, and they responded, when the inner voice of conscience tells us right from wrong, and we follow that instinct, we are in the flow. When our intuition says not now, or now is the time to make that important telephone call, we are in the flow. The flow is simply the stream of life energy that is spiraling aloft and will take us with it if we heed the inner wisdom. When you thwart that spiraling flow, you are bucking headwinds and will have to stumble or fall back. Really a simple basic law of the universe. As the Bible says, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. By heeding the inner voice, one realizes when it is right for him. Why force oneself to rush out into a stormy night and hurl oneself against driving rain when in another hour or so the night will be calm and starry? Life is like that. Choose carefully the right time to go for the important interview or to submit an article for publication. Feel it within yourself that this is your time to move, or just to wait quietly until the wisdom within says go. Inasmuch as both the guides and my walk-in friends have stressed that there is a time to take action, and a time to wait until an inner voice tells us to act. I asked Michael if this philosophy might not lead to endless procrastination. What happens if a person continually says he doesn't feel like doing anything that day but sleeping or watching television or goofing off? He's copping out, Michael replied. To be in the flow means that you accept the responsibility for your own evolution. Constantly to sleep or to kill time is a cop-out. You have to make a contribution because the first commandment of life is you shall work and serve. That doesn't mean you're going to serve yourself. It means you're going to serve life. And until you've worked and served life, you are not ready for the second commandment to learn and grow. You're not evolving. When one chooses to be in the flow, he chooses to listen to the direction that seems the most harmonious. He listens to his intuition. He works and serves. But all of us have free will. So what if a person couldn't care less about being in the flow and serving life? A lot of people are like that. They choose the material and go after wealth, not realizing that it is an illusion, Michael answered. They amass lots of wealth, but when they eventually pass into the spirit stage, the wealth doesn't go with them. So what have they gained in evolution? They may go through 60 lifetimes like that before they're ready to start looking for truth, for the reality. Each entity has freedom to choose how rapidly he will evolve. We can go all the Sandlot baseball games we want to along the way, but sooner or later, we're going to get tired of Sandlot baseball and look for something that has greater depth and more lasting meaning. So all of us will eventually evolve to the point that we are in the flow, I asked. Yes, right on. One morning, the guides proposed another exercise, which they said could help us get into the flow, declaring that there are various ways to become a living stream of energy. They counseled when one is in bed, he can sense the force of flow more easily if he lies with his head to the north, so that he is in line with the polar energies. Then, as he feels himself becoming a part of the Earth's rhythm, he will mentally float off into the stratosphere, with the Earth becoming smaller and smaller as it recedes from his inner view. As he gently moves along in outer space, the Earth's circumference has long since been left behind, and in a spiral motion, he is as completely immersed in cosmic rhythms as if he were a star in fixed motion, orbiting around other bodies and feeling himself a part of the divinity. There is something special in this feeling of oneness with the cosmic force. Then, as one eventually descends to his bed, he realizes the awesome majesty of the firmament and the minuscule part that he is playing, so that problems which have been disturbing him seem as child's play to solve. How easy after such a mental adventure to see what seemed insurmountable as solving itself. For when one chooses between two courses of action, there's always one which seems right, whereas the other has too many ands, ifs, and buts about it. Take that course which feels right, as if it too were a part of the cosmic force, and there will be no nagging doubts. The still small voice within is always right, and when one taps into the cosmic sweep of events, one sees how right that particular voice has been. The guides say that it is easy for us to feel ourselves a part of the stream of universal life energies. If we will only begin to practice it, you ride in the orbit gently feeling yourself a part of the great current that encircles the Earth as it does all planets, which sustain life forms that averred. A dead planet such as the Moon is one whose energy flow has dissolved and gone back into the stratosphere. This flow is a part of life and energizes all life. It is there, whether you sense it or not. But in order to use it to individual advantage, one should feed himself into that stream for a time, feeling himself a part of the energy flow and re-energizing himself in the process. If one would do this several times daily during periods of stress or exhaustion, he would find himself literally walking on air. It is a vital force, and it is part of the universal laws of life. My friend Laura urges that all of us begin to practice being in the flow whenever we think of it and listen to our intuition. Getting the hang of it now, she says, can save the lives of those who want to survive the shift. Understanding the flow can help whole groups of survivors to reach areas of safety in plenty of time, provide them with sufficient food and shelter, and aid them with the monumental task of rebuilding a better world. In another chapter, she discusses how walk-ins advise channeling the energies, similar to this discussion. So the question is, would you like to be able to conjure up empty parking spaces on crowded streets, dissolve clouds, heal your friends, enjoy bountiful good health, produce prize-winning flowers and vegetables of singular perfection? Then learn to use the energies. The guides say that we are all swimming in an inexhaustible sea of energies, and that those who seemingly perform miracles simply know how to utilize the energies. It's apparently as simple as the law of gravity, if we understand the principle. By testing some of these basic truths now and proving their workability, we will better be equipped to withstand the rigors of the decades remaining. These tried and true methods may be our best survival kit. Let's begin by dissolving a cloud. Hundreds of people have accomplished this simply by believing that it can be done. Professor Charles H. Hapgood, author of several scientific books, for one which Albert Einstein wrote the introduction, amazed a group of his friends by successfully performing this feat 3 times in succession. To test it for yourself, select a small cloud and give it your undivided concentration for several minutes. Mentally tell it to dissolve, and picture energies flowing through you and up to the cloud to increase its temperature. Keep watching and it will disappear as if by magic. My walk-in friend Laura has proved it to her own satisfaction. Having heard of the phenomenon, she was eager to test it and says of that experience, "I was in the backyard hanging up laundry. It was one of those days when fluffy clouds were passing overhead against a deep blue sky, a perfect day for experimenting. Much to my surprise, the first cloud I tried disappeared completely within 4 minutes. That could have been a coincidence, but I tried a second and a third. In each instance, the cloud thinned, faded, and then vanished. At that point, I was forced to think very seriously about the power of thought in willing a small cloud to disappear. I had a graphic demonstration that human thought can affect changes in physical matter, even if the object is miles away. This was no longer theory. I had tried it out and proved it to myself. I began to realize that if one human being can control a cloud by using only the mind, enormous good could be accomplished simply by the power of thought if we all work together. The guides say that even World War III, which looms darkly on the horizon, can be prevented if we all begin now to concentrate our thoughts on a peaceful world. The energies will work toward that goal. Miriam, who is more advanced than most of us, asks with a dry chuckle, why bother to dissolve clouds? Why not concentrate on forming clouds or shaping them? It's much more artistic. Another beginner's experiment to prove the power of the mind is producing an empty parking space where none exists. This is the basic law of manifestation. Strongly visualize what you need, then follow your own intuition, stay in the flow, and you will be led to it. To manifest a parking space, choose a time when there is an imperative need for one. If you have circled the block without success, concentrate on the area nearest your destination, and know that a parking space will materialize for you there. Send forth the energies, and as you near the coveted place, a car will pull out at the right time. Ruth Montgomery, my late sister-in-law, who first introduced me to psychic phenomena, used to drive her aged mother to the doctor's office in a downtown area that was always jammed with automobiles. Since her mother was too frail for much walking, Rhoda would mentally say to her deceased father, "All right, Papa, if you want me to take Mama to the doctor, find me a parking place in front of the building." Invariably, a parked car would pull out just as she reached the desired space. This would seem to demonstrate the point that Laura made in speaking of the flow. If it seems more natural to request a needed object through prayer or divine intercession or help from discarnates, do so. The energies are being set in motion through your own concentration on the need. Laura regularly manifests parking spaces. I've tried it on occasion when the need was urgent and have found that it works. I know of a hard-pressed mother who visualized a warm coat for her little girl, only to have a neighbor ask if she could pass on her some winter clothing that her own child had outgrown. Another woman desperately needed a gas range, and after visualizing it for a couple days, an acquaintance mentioned that she would like to get rid of one that she was replacing with electricity. Findhorn, the famous community in northern Scotland, is a good example of the workings of this law, since its greenhouse, its bungalows, and numberless other needed objects were manifested by its founder, Peter Cady. Or if you want a closer to home example of the law of manifestation, Laura said, with a pixie grin, look at us. I used to visualize meeting any favorite writer, Ruth Montgomery, and I would picture myself being able to encourage her and help her to continue writing. It really works, you see? It was a rather strange sensation to realize that energies projected toward me from a stranger had actually prompted me to write this book. Yet I had to admit that of the tens of thousands of letters I have received from my unknown readers, this was the first instance in which I had been so captivated that I'd actually gone to see the letter writer. Laura, in discussing the chapter, emphasized it is important to give to life, for life will give to you as you yourself give. One cannot simply keep manifesting material needs for selfish reasons, because if the reasons are selfish, the law will cease to work. Findhorn, about which the public television network recently ran an hour-long documentary, is an excellent demonstration of another way to put the energies to work for a good cause. Nearly everyone by now has heard of this phenomenal community established in 1962 on a barren stretch of gorse and sand, where the agricultural experts said that nothing but the most tenacious weeds would grow, which has blossomed into a veritable Garden of Eden. Through visualizing their needs, including a greenhouse, and projecting the energies and love to every stone and seed and human task, while scorning chemical fertilizers and noxious sprays, the Cadys and their friends were soon harvesting incredible crops, including some cabbages weighing approximately 40 pounds each. These are the kinds of experiments and types of communal groups that the guides say will be of inestimable benefit in helping others cope with the shift of the axis at the close of the century. If the power of thought on energies can dissolve clouds, manifest parking spaces or greenhouses, and produce record-breaking crops, it can obviously affect bodies as well. If you like, test out the healing energies first on a household pet. Last year, a veterinarian told my cousin that nothing could be done for his aging dog who was so stiff from arthritis that she could scarcely walk. After studying the x-rays, which clearly delineated calcium deposits in the joints, my cousin decided to try a healing technique that he had read about in a magazine. Each evening for about 10 minutes, he would take the dog in his lap, pet her, and then picture warmth and energy flowing through the arms and hands into the calcium deposits. Simultaneously, he visualized the deposits breaking down and being absorbed into the bloodstream so that they could pass out of the body as waste. He reports that while channeling the energies, he could feel a tingling and warmth in his hands and arms. And after a week of this treatment, the pet became so lively that she began jumping up on chairs. At first, he thought the recovery might have been coincidental, but when the stiffness began to return, he went back to the channeling the energies into her joints, and the dog has had no recurrence of the problem that the vet had pronounced incurable. Edgar Cayce cautioned his followers not to place people on their prayer healing lists unless they themselves requested it. When I asked the guides to explain this principle, they wrote, "It is important that the person wants to be healed, for unless he does, interfering relatives and friends can prolong a term in schoolhouse earth which is completed. Those who wish to be healed and feel that there is a purpose yet to be served in physical being should alert those around him to that desire, and they in unison should visualize the person as completely whole, lively swinging down the street or going about important tasks with a smile on his lips. Do not, for selfish reasons, try to stay the passing of another. Always remember the purpose to be served, while realizing that the best life is in spirit, so why prolong the stay of one whose work is about finished? As to healing from a less than fatal ailment, it is good to wish that the pain or discomfort leave that body. There is strength in numbers, and if a group gathers together, the energies are drawn more rapidly. They need not cluster around the patient's bed. The energies are directed to that person, whether or not he is physically present. It is important not to tell the energies what to do. Let the energies go to work. They know much better than you do what is needed. Miriam uses a system that is said to be safer than picturing tissue, cells, or masses. She mentally places the patient within a golden ovoid that is flecked with light green, which psychics call the healing color, blesses him, and then lets the energies go to work. Many others, of course, effectively use the power of prayer. And when I asked the guides to explain what happens with prayer and with blessings, they wrote, the power of prayer transcends all other energy for mankind. This is the direct approach to the creative force and melds with the universal power of love. Prayer goes to the source of all energy and all power. If one unselfishly asks of God, that wish is a part of the creative whole. To request blessings for others is a part of the force of love. To ask that rivals or enemies be blessed is a breaking down of barriers which separate one from another. To ask that others be blessed is to recapture the oneness of all egos, the oneship with God, the wholeness of the creative force. As to healing by turning over the problem to the energies, why not? They are a creative force in action. Miriam has encouraged Laura to bless each piece of work as it comes into her hands and to send it on with a blessing when she has completed it. This, of course, is a mental process, not a moving one's hand over an object, as a priest often does. Laura says of it, when I wish to bless someone, I let flow a stream of energies from somewhere beyond me out to and around and through the person blessed. It happens in the twinkling of an eye with no words. It is rather like surrounding them with love. I now do the same with my work. A great deal has been written in recent years about the power of prayer on plants. Scientist Cleve Baxter, biologist Jagadish Chandra Bose, the Reverend Franklin Lair, and Professor Hapgood and others have conducted controlled scientific experiments in this field, all seemingly proving that plants thrive on love or prayer, but may wither and die if hate is directed their way. Just as our thoughts can affect people, pets, clouds, and inanimate objects, so do they affect living plants. This discovery takes on added importance if we believe the dire events the guides foresee for the remainders of the century. An ability to grow large amounts of food in unfertilized areas of the world will mean the difference between life and death for those who survived the famine of the 1980s and the later shift of the axis, when so much of our cultivated land disappears beneath the seas while new lands emerge. When a plant is loved and appreciated, and when we visualize it as healthy and productive, it will thrive. Curse it or spend your time feeling sorry for yourself, and it tends to sicken and die. Plants respond to our vibrations. They also have reaction of their own. Baxter, by attaching the electrodes of a polygraph to his houseplants, discovered they reacted violently when live shrimp were dropped into boiling water. They registered apprehension to the approach of a dog and trembled when voices were raised in anger. When plants and fruit trees become critical to our own survival, we would do well to remember that a loved plant finds its way to be healthy than the one that is ignored or taken for granted. By the same token, we can improve our own state of being by visualizing ourselves as healthy and at peace with others. If we want to enjoy vibrant good health, we can manifest it for ourselves by thinking in those terms. If you visualize yourself as ill or fear that a situation will develop that can prevent you from being active, you may subconsciously begin making the decisions which can lead to that situation. But when we picture our body as working in health and inner harmony, we improve our attitude and attract the healing energies that are all about us. Some feel that cancer is the result of unhealthy or unhappy attitudes towards life. I asked the guides about this, and they replied, not all persons are unhealthy through a subconscious wish to be so. Some are repaying karmic debts, and others are weak in certain areas through birth defect or childhood exposure and mishaps. Some are ailing for valid reasons, but there are so many psychosomatic causes of illness as to defy description. Think healthy, be healthy. Because of the emphasis placed on the power of thought, I urged the guides to explain in greater detail how the energies can work for us. The energies are there to be used, they wrote, and if proper respect is paid to them, they will perform countless tasks that otherwise would be impossible. Let us take, for example, a man who wishes to have a different job in order to provide better for his family. He will visualize the work that he wishes to be doing and the salary that he requires in order to meet adequately his living costs. Then he will send out the energies by believing that it will happen and seeing himself in that job, happy and valuable as a contributor to the workforce. If the goal is reasonable, and if he is adequately trained and fitted for the position, he will be amazed to discover how quickly that dream is realized. Remember that it must be a position for which he is qualified, and one within his potentials. He will, of course, have to put forth his own effort to secure it, but by concentrating on that one line of work in one particular company, he will start the energies that will affect the decision of those who do the hiring, and the job will be his. As to clouds, the energies are indeed capable of warming and puffing away a fleecy cloud. That does not mean that one man is able to will a leaden sky to become blue, for collective energies are needed there, as with the Indian rain dances of yore. But the energies will work for individuals in their own affairs if the motive is unselfish. Just as any of us can work with healing energies or can let energies flow through us to affect physical matter, so we can increase harmony and balance by visualizing a troubled or irate person as happy and at peace within himself. Try it on the next woman you see angrily sputtering at the checkout counter in a supermarket. Visualize her as contented and loving, sending her the energies, and see if she does not turn away with a smile. If others are gossiping about the failings of someone you know, be brave enough to interject a positive thought by speaking of that person's good qualities. This can set off a ripple effect of which my walk-in friends so frequently speak. Because they brought in awareness, the walk-ins seem intuitively to understand the principle that thoughts are things, and that by speaking kindly of another, the ideal will be spread to those in the gossiping circle, and through them to an ever-widening group of individuals as they speak of it, so to others. Thus harmony is achieved. The guides say of this now as to ripple effect, when one's mental activities influence another, and that other person, another, and so on. Through those with whom each comes into contact, it is like casting a stone in the water and watching the circles or ripples become larger and larger until the entire lake may seem like a satellite of the stone cast. So it is as we influence the behavior and thoughts of others through our own activities, and why it is so important to be kind and thoughtful and loving, lest we have a deleterious effect on an entire community or even entire society. Walk-ins are adept at instilling confidence in others, and through this rippling effect they influence a wide range of acquaintances. A walk-in may quietly go about his work simply by speaking kindly of others. From there, the energy can spread through a workplace or business, creating more harmonious conditions, and as each worker brings the greater harmony home with him, it spreads through his family and out to their acquaintances and friends. There is no more effective use of the energies than projecting them to others in love and harmony. The guides say that this method could work wonders in cooling racial tensions and preventing wars. The most dramatic demonstration of channeled energies that I personally have experienced occurred at the close of a 4-day seminar in which a group of us had been working together to experiment with largely untapped areas of the human mind. No one in the group was particularly psychic. We were simply an ordinary collection of people, and with some difficulty I persuaded my husband to accompany me. In the final hour, the leader, who happened to be a successful businessman from Florida, asked us to arrange our chairs in a circle and hold hands. An empty seat had been placed in the center. As each individual in turn occupied the center chair for a minute or two, we were directed to send love and healing energies to him. This had been quietly going on for approximately a quarter of an hour. When my turn came, as I advanced toward the vacant chair, I felt a distinct electric shock, and then a tingling all over, as if I were crossing through a magnetized curtain to reach the center of the circle. The prickles continued while I sat in the chair, and I felt exactly as if an electrified substance that could be touched was encircling me. It was a radiating, pulsing, physical sensation of pure love. Not until I returned to my seat in the circle did my world return to normal. I was stunned. Had I imagined it? That was impossible, and as no one had told us what to expect, it could not be attributed to the power of suggestion. When the session ended, I drew my husband aside and asked if he had felt any particular sensation while taking his turn in the center of the circle. I defy anyone to produce a man or woman more practical than my husband or less interested in psychic phenomenon, yet he described exactly the same physical reactions I had experienced. Recalling this puzzling incident to Miriam several years later after the event, I sought an explanation, and the elderly wise one commented The dynamic between the experience is in the fact that mind is not brain. The brain is the biochemical electrical switchboard that the mind uses as the link between inner being and the life form that is occupying it. When a group of 3 or more in a circle beaming the same thought toward one in the center, the minds are unwittingly letting certain powerful energies flow. It's like taking 2 or 3 batteries in a series to step up the so-called psychic voltage. When all in a group are asked to beam something to someone, they have let their minds become channels, and the receiver in the center has quite an experience. Perhaps others will try it. On that particular evening, when I experienced love energy as a physical reality, approximately 20 sat in the linked circle, imagining then the energy toward peace that we could project if hundreds of us formed such circles simultaneously in various parts of the world. So the key parts of this come from the beginning, where we have an idea of understanding walk-ins, somebody that's gone through a tremendous change. And this gives us a little bit better idea of who they are and what they are. But I think the more important part of this episode is the second half. What I have learned so far is there are not a bunch of walk-ins. There is fewer than there are star seats. There's millions of star seats and maybe hundreds of thousands of walk-ins. But the walk-ins offer us unique insight because they are outside of the programming that we get when we're children. And what they're teaching us, the different people that our walk-ins have taught us, is that we can use these energies and we can move into the flow, and it can change our life. Now, I have discussed the flow on numerous episodes, going all the way back to quantum physics and consciousness, and in reality transurfing, in the alternatives flow episode, this is the same concept they're talking about. And oftentimes people that are going for a particular goal will move against the flow, and it takes them away from their goal. This idea that we're moving in a flow is very helpful, and when you trust your intuition, it can save you, can help you survive. So are you a walk-in? You will ultimately learn that on your own path. But more importantly, the people that are walk-ins have offered us incredible lessons that we can learn that help us to create a better world. The lessons that we get from the guides and the walk-ins in this particular episode are fundamental. That is, if you want to create your reality, do it outside of your own selfish desires. When you think unselfishly, when you think outside of just your own selfish desires, that is when you're in the flow, and you can invite these energies, and these energies flow with you. You can have abundance. You can have anything that you want if you're thinking outside of yourself. And when you do, oftentimes you can help yourself just as much. All of these things are possible. So perhaps you're a walk-in, and I'd love to hear about you and your story. If you are a walk-in, put it in the comments. We're still learning about this. Maybe there's more walk-ins now than there were back in the 80s when this was written. And I will continue to study this and learn more about it. I really wish I could read some of the Dolores Cannon literature on walk-ins, so I recommend that. There is some chapters that she writes about walk-ins as well, and you'll find that interesting in the Convoluted Universe series. In any case, I want to thank you, and I'm sending energies to you, a golden ball of light that will heal you, that will help you, that is pure love, and I hope you can feel it now. And anybody who ever listens to this, that is what I want to do, is send you love, hoping that you're having a wonderful day. All episodes of The Reality Revolution can be found at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.